Yep, there are so many bubbles on the backside of this tabletop. Sometimes when you're building things, you make mistakes, and most of the times you'll find a way to fix them. But I don't know if I can fix this one. Couple of years back, I got this live edge slab from a friend. Free stuff is always good, right? I don't know what wood species it is. I think it might be maple. I used a circle cutting jig to circular patterns on the slab and used one of these for the bar tabletop. When using a circle cutting jig on the slabs, I do not cut all the way. Depending on the thickness of the slab, I stop cutting at one point and use a jigsaw to cut the rest. This is my preferred process of cutting circles, especially on hardwoods. This process avoids any accidental slips of the router when you try to cut the entire circle with the router. After the jigsaw cut, there will be minimum amount of material to remove, and the best method is to use a router with a flush trim bit. A router table or a palm router can be used to remove the excess. I use Super Clear's liquid glass deep pore epoxy for this tabletop. I like this product and have been using it for last 3 years. I normally stock it up when they run their 30 or 35% off promotion. This epoxy comes with resin and an activator, and you need to measure 2 parts of resin to 1 part of activator. After adding the pigment, I prefer using a drill to stir epoxy for 5 to 7 minutes and then set it aside for 5 to 10 minutes. Setting aside will help all the bubbles come up and you can blow them with a heat gun or a torch. I used a 24-inch round reusable HDPE foam for the pour. I can make my own mold for the pour, but I prefer to buy the reusable foams for any kind of small pours. Buying foams will be cost effective in the long term. You can use this foam multiple times and need not worry about any leaks or mold sticking to the epoxy. For smaller pours, I prefer to cover all the wood with epoxy. That way it will fill 90% of the wood cracks, splits and holes. It might seem that we are wasting a lot of epoxy, but this will save a lot of time by avoiding filling these later. Epoxy is a liquid form and wood can easily float after the pour. So it's always better to clamp the wood or use some scrap wood covered with duct tape and add weights to the scrap wood. Adding duct tape is very important because duct tape doesn't get glued to epoxy and it's easy to remove. And this is where the mistake happened, where a lot of bubbles formed on the bottom side of the table. I placed the wood upside down. The top you see here is flat, but the bottom is not. Because of the bottom not being flat, there are some gaps between the foam and the wood, and that's why there were so many bubbles formed at the bottom. This did not turn out to be a costly mistake. I can fix this by routing all the bubbles and pouring more epoxy to fill the routed area. Because it's the bottom and the table base will cover most of the bubbles, I left it the way it is. I did not check the flatness of the mold before pouring epoxy. Always check the flatness of the mold before pouring epoxy and blow out any bubbles with torch or a heat gun. Demolding should be a breeze when using HDPE forms, but this one took a minute. I used a mallet on the first try but no luck. Then I grabbed an old chisel and just tapped on few corners and it got demolded. When you get struck like this, use a chisel and mallet to tap. Tap gently and don't go aggressive where the foam gets torn from the chisel. Most of the time the slab will not be flat after demolding. You can use local milling services to get the slab flattened or use tools like drum sander or belt sander. The drum sander leaves marks on the tabletop. To remove the marks, use a belt sander or an aggressive sander with 60 grit to remove the drum sander marks. Using mineral spirits can help to check the progress of sanding. I noticed the bubbles on the back side after cleaning with mineral spirits. Some bubbles are below the surface, which I am not going to fix. Some bubbles are on the top of the surface, so bursting them with a chisel will be better before you fill those with epoxy. Now the top is all prepped for finish sanding. I used a router to make a 45-degree chamfer on the bottom and a roundover on the top to give some visual appeal. You can use a palm router or a router table for this. When you are making passes with router, it's always good to take out small amounts at a time than doing the complete cut. I used epoxy to fill the holes that are left after bursting the bubbles. Whenever you fill small holes or wood cracks with epoxy, it's good to use a syringe, that way you'll not overfill the hole or waste any epoxy. After the epoxy is cured, I used a card scraper to take out the excess and sand it. There's a possibility of having small tiny holes after filling with epoxy. CA glue and activator is the best way to fill these holes. I used a medium CA glue here. Activator helps CA glue to cure within seconds, and you can sand immediately without waiting. When you are sanding, it's always good to draw some lines with a pencil. This will help you to track the progress of the sanding. For finish sanding, I started with 100 grit and finished with 220 grit. Between every grit, I wiped the dust with a blue shop towel and sprayed some water and then wiped with a clean shop towel. Spraying water will help raise the grain. If you are making a dining table or any table that will have contact with water or drinks, it's always good to raise the grain. Sanding the edges is one of the important steps of the finishing process. Sometimes we don't take this seriously, but we should, because when somebody sees your finished piece, which looks amazing, they'll touch the top and the sides. Imagine if it's smooth on the top but not on the sides, and if they ask why the sides are rough, we'll not have an answer. Rather than feeling bad at the time, putting in some extra effort during the finish process will help. When that someone says, "What an excellent piece of furniture you made, amazing job," imagine the feeling you'll have. So, do not skip this step. You can hand sand the edges or use a soft pad on the sander with the lowest speed setting. Most companies will sell soft pads. If you cannot find one for your sander, you can always bank on Amazon. For the finish, I prefer Rubio Monocoat. This is the best part of the build. You can see how the grain comes to life. Rubio Monocoat is a hard wax oil and very easy to apply. Pour the finish, then use a spreader to spread across the surface, and then use a scouring white pad to rub the finish on the surface and the sides. The next step I follow is optional. To finish better, use a buffer and a buffing pad to buff the surface and remove any excess with a blue shop towel. Even with buffer or without buffer, use blue shop towels to remove excess. This application will take 5 days to cure, but if you want to install a base, you can do it after a couple of hours. I bought the base for this table from Wayfair. Most of the time I make the base out of wood, but for this one, I want a base that is round. I never made a base that is round, so I ordered a metal base. The base is 42 inches in height and the bottom is 18 inches in diameter. This base can hold round tabletops that are between 24 inches and 36 inches in diameter. For attaching the base, I placed a foam pad on the workbench to avoid any scratches to the tabletop. I had the tabletop facing down and placed the base and measured with tape to get an equal distance on all 4 sides. The pilot holes for this base are small and threaded insert do not fit. You can make the holes bigger and use threaded inserts, but I don't have any metal drilling tools, so I drilled pilot holes for the screws and drove the screws. Now some beauty shots. I'm no expert here, but I tried with an iPhone 14 Pro Max. Not bad. Some of you might be wondering what's the reason for red pigment. The reason is we got a pool table with red felt. I want to have the table near the pool table. Thanks for watching the video. If you like the video, please subscribe and support the channel. Thank you.